5 red heifers arrived in Israel last Thursday, and it all has to do with Texas. If that doesn't mean anything to you, stay tuned. We're going to talk about it. Hello, I'm Lucas Kitchen. Thanks for being with me. This is More to the Story with Lucas Kitchen. Be sure to subscribe on the platform of your choice. By the way, you can go to freegrace.in and see all the other content that we make, and you can subscribe there through email, either daily or weekly. Now, I want to talk about this red heifer. So what's the red heifer all about? Well, as you may know, the red heifer is basically a cow. It's a cow with red hide, and it's required to practice traditional Mosaic law in Israel. The red heifer is used to create what's called the water of purification. You can read about that in Numbers 19. There's some particulars there, but I'll give you the gist of it. Without the red heifer, the temple system is dead in the water. Now, there's not currently a temple, but they're working on it, and they're going to need a red heifer. Now, there's one tiny eensy-weensy problem with this. Red heifers are incredibly rare, at least the kind they're looking for. Rabbis estimate that only about maybe 9 of them have ever been found and used in the eras of the temples of Jerusalem. So this is a difficulty to find a red heifer, and they've been looking for a while. Now, of course, I'm sure you know that the next temple, which they call the third temple because there have been 2 previous temples, the third temple has not been built yet. It's, I guess you could say, waiting to be built, but many of the implements and the instruments for temple worship have already been made. Apparently, I read this last night, 500 men with the right lineage have been trained to perform priestly duties when the temple is built, and there's plans to build another temple on the Temple Mount. Now, you're probably thinking, wait a minute, on the Temple Mount, there's some complications with that. Absolutely there are. The Al-Aqsa Mosque is up there, the Dome of the Rock, both occupy that same real estate. But there are plans to make a shared space of that real estate. It's a possibility. It would be tense, it would be difficult, but a peace treaty could be made, and they could build that temple, and it could begin pretty soon. However, all of that doesn't really matter without a red heifer. A heifer is a cow, by the way, a female cow. So without a red heifer, there's no kosher way to jumpstart a new temple, even if it were built. It's like having a car, but not having the keys. And in this case, the key to the temple's ignition is a red cow. So about a decade ago, a group of rabbis began the search, and they began in earnest. They knew they were going to need this cow. They knew it was probably going to take quite a while to find one. So many cows in Israel were inspected, but there just wasn't a viable option. So the agency that was searching began looking more abroad. And there's no rule that says that the red heifer has to come from Israel, or even that it has to come from a Jew. In fact, there's rabbinical stories where non-Jews have provided red heifers for the temple. Now, this is how this becomes a Texas story, and I'm so proud about this. When I saw this had to do with Texas, I just sort of had some of that Texas pride that everybody hears about. So a group of Texas ranchers, who, by the way, also happen to be devout Christians, I think probably evangelical Christians, they got wind that a red cow was needed. And I can just imagine this conversation at some point. A red cow to help Israel? Now that's something I can do. That's the Texas can-do attitude. I live in Texas, by the way, as you could probably tell. A group even took out ads that other Texas ranchers would see, and the word spread. The ads encouraged Texas ranchers to set aside any red heifers that were born to their herd. Now, this does happen occasionally, but there's some pretty strict rules that go along with the kind of red heifer that they need. So there was an obvious problem with this whole plan based on the rules that the red heifer has to follow. One of the requirements for the red heifer to be the red heifer that they're looking for is that it has to have no blemish. That means it has to be basically a perfect animal. No scars, no branding, no ear tag, and there's the problem. that there's a Texas law in place that every cow, every heifer or bull that's born in the state of Texas has to be tagged with an ear tag. You know, they used to brand cows, but they've gone to this ear tag. So it punches a hole in the ear of the cow and it tags them so that you can keep track of your cows and you kind of know what's going on. But that constitutes a blemish. That means that any red heifer that's born in Texas, you would think, would have a blemish in it because of those ear tags. Now, here's where the story takes a really interesting turn. At the height of the COVID pandemic, many people were not coming into work. You remember this? I mean, lots of people were staying home. Of course you remember. Why did I even ask that? Of course you remember that. Now, a certain Texas rancher reports that a group of 5, you heard that right, 5 red heifers were born in one litter. I think a litter of cows is actually called a clouder or something like that, or Crowder, or I don't know, maybe you look that up. But 5, and this is incredibly rare to even have one viable candidate, but to have 5 is incredibly rare within itself. But here's where it gets even more amazing. It's amazing more still because during the height of the COVID pandemic, the employee, this rancher's employee who normally puts in the ear tags, he didn't come into work that day because of COVID. So these 5 calves, these 5 red heifers remained unblemished, no ear tag. Now, I don't know how they got around the Texas law, but they remained unblemished, no mark on them. So when they were 8 or 9 months old, rabbis from Israel were called to inspect them. And it wasn't long after that a group of Israeli rabbis from the Temple Institute showed up in Comanche, Texas. This is where the story just hit home for me because Comanche, Texas is not all that far from where I am. I mean, it's a few hours drive. It's a couple hours drive from Dallas, but I'm not far from Dallas, and I don't know. Anyway, it just stood out to me like, what? These came from Comanche, Texas. So these rabbis came to Comanche, Texas to inspect this sibling set of red heifers, and apparently they passed the test. Now, it's a little unclear as I looked at the stories if that original 5 cows is the same as the one that just arrived in Israel. But apparently some cows from Texas, and I think they're the ones from Comanche, they passed the test because 5 red cows arrived in Israel last Thursday. They had a ceremony and it was a big thing. So I'm so proud of Texas. I mean, of all the places on the planet where cattle grow, Texas takes the blue ribbon for the county fair here. I mean, this is just exciting to me to think that Texas has played a role in all of this. Now, you may be wondering, why would evangelical Christians be interested in helping Israel acquire a red heifer? Right? I mean, Christianity and Judaism are 2 different religions. I remember one time inviting a guy to the church where I grew up, and the sermon that day talked a little bit about the Jews, which is something Christians do often, obviously. And the guy leaned over and said, "Is this a Jewish church?" It's like, no, it's a Christian church, but we're tied to Judaism in some very deep ways. And so why would Christians help Orthodox Jews restart temple Judaism? Well, it's actually kind of a means to an end. I mean, Christians agree that the Jewish system is not the way that God intends man to make his relationship right with God any longer. I said that in a weird way, but Judaism, temple Judaism, is, in our opinion, in Christians' opinion, no longer the way that God uses to have a relationship with people. So for Christians, this whole thing is about actually end-time prophecy. You see, end-time prophecy talks about how there will be a functioning temple in the final days. And for there to be a functioning temple, there needs to be a red heifer. That's just part of the system. There has to be a red cow for certain ceremonies for the temple to begin. So Christians don't care so much about temple Judaism, other than maybe they're interested in it, but they don't care so much about that. What Christians care about is the return of the Lord. So many Christians are willing to help Jews along the way if they believe it brings about the conditions that we see in end times prophecy. Now, I feel a little funny about that because I know that Christ is going to return when he is supposed to return, but it's neat to think that a Texas rancher provided those cows that might play a role somehow in this whole thing. For me, what it does really is it's just a reminder that God is not done with Israel. And I know there are many theological traditions that teach that the church, the Christian church, has replaced Israel in God's plan, but that's ridiculous. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous based on what the Bible actually says, especially when you consider what Paul said in Romans 11:25 through 27. So let's take a look at that. He says this: blindness in part has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. Now, think about that for a second. It's saying blindness in part. It's not saying full blindness. So there is some religious sensitivity among Jews, but it's saying that blindness to the full truth of the Messiah, who is Jesus Christ, has happened to Israel for a certain amount of time. And he gives this time frame. He says, until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. So basically what he's saying is that God wanted Gentiles to come into the fold. He wanted Gentiles to be part of the eternal family. He wanted to graft Gentiles into the tree, so to speak. And to do that, he needed to put a pause on the Jewish salvation plan. The verse that Paul wrote here goes on to say, and so all Israel will be saved. As it is written, the deliverer will come out of Zion, and he will turn away ungodliness from Jacob, for this is my covenant with them when I take away their sins. So this red heifer, for me, I don't know how it fits into God's prophetic plan, but I do know that it's a reminder to me of what Christ did. Christ is the ultimate, can we say it, the ultimate water of purification. Christ's blood, not the blood of a bull or a heifer, is what cleanses us from sins. When we believe in Jesus for everlasting life, we get that absolute forgiveness. So it's a reminder, though, that God's not done with Israel and that there is a path to salvation that Israel will follow, and that path is still being paved. It was put on pause for a while. You could think of the road construction was put on pause. But is it possible that this red heifer is an indication that God is turning his attention back to Israel? Maybe so. I think it's a strong possibility that that's what's going on based on some other verses in the New Testament. So it's going to be interesting and very exciting to watch what happens, especially now that the Temple Institute has these red heifers in hand. They are that much closer to beginning a new phase, a third temple, a new phase in Temple Judaism. And as Christians, I pray that Christ will return very soon. Well, thanks for watching. We'll be back with you soon.